In considering the vast complexity of the musics that exists in Latin America, I like to think of it in the three basic cultural strata, elements, patterns, really spheres of influence. And one of them, of course, is the indigenous cultures that were here before the coming of the Europeans. Another big external influence is, of course, the African, because slavery not only had a profound effect on music in the United States, but in every culture of Latin America that was proximity to the coast. In some way or another, there was an effect there. Some of them lasted, some of them did not. But the third element, and this is not certainly in any order of importance, but that would be the culture of the European cultures that colonized the New World. And in the case of Latin American music, that's primarily the cultures of Iberia. I mean, Portugal and Spain. Portugal and Spain are both distinct, but they both have important similarities, and particularly in terms of the manner in which different musical styles evolved in the New World, they had a very powerful impact. Both Spain and Portugal are different from the rest of Europe, probably because of the long-lasting influence of Arabic culture on the Iberian Peninsula. It made the cultures of that region different. It changed the language, it affected the architecture, it affected the foodways, and it certainly affected the music. So there are a number of ways in which the Iberian Peninsula is unique, but I want to consider basically three different elements that they're not the only ones by any means, but three that I consider important in talking about the music of Latin America in light of the European influence, that is the Iberian influence. This is the development of the guitar, the instrument, the guitar, which has a very important effect in Latin America and in the Iberian Peninsula as well. The second one is the harp, which is virtually non-existent as a folk and popular instrument in Iberia any longer, but survives in the New World, and the manner in which it survives is very interesting, I think. The third is a performance tradition, and that's the concept of poetic duets, where two poets will compete against each other, pick a theme, and improvise on it. Challenges, duets, responses, and this is a tradition that existed in Spain and Portugal and continues in very interesting ways in the New World. So these are three separate topics I'll deal with separately. Let's begin with the guitar. The guitar now is very widespread all over the world, and particularly because of its importance in the development of Anglo-American pop music, rock, it had spread all over the world. But the guitar actually is most clearly connected with Spain. There are a number of different varieties of it, and there are varieties of it in Spain and in Portugal. They all seem to have their antecedents in old, probably medieval Spanish history, maybe earlier, probably from the beginning of the coming of the culture of the Arabs. During the 7th and 8th centuries, Arabic culture spreads across North Africa and blends and mixes with the Berber cultures of North Africa, and then they invade and override Spain. And we think of that as a rather violent, strong invasion. On the other hand, Spain at the time was deteriorating because of the Visigoths were in control and the Roman Empire was in decline. And so actually many Spaniards saw the coming of Arabic civilization as something rather refined, and soon everyone wanted to learn Arabic, everyone wanted to write in Arabic poetic forms, and there are even some early versions of the Bible written in Arabic by these early Spaniards. So it was a positive influence in many ways. Well, a number of different forms came out from this Arabic influence, and also the harp came with the Arabs, and the guitar came. We don't know what the old Arabic Spanish music sounded like, but there's a group of people who live in Morocco, and there's some in Tunisia, I think, as well, who play what they call Andalusian music. It's what they consider the tradition of the kind of music that the Arabs played while they were in Spain. It seems strongly Arabic influenced, but why shouldn't it be? It is Arabic, in fact. And it's hard to find how it's connected to Spanish music, but it is very different from all the other kinds of music found in Arabic North Africa. So here's an example of the so-called, or so this is what they call it themselves, the Andalusian music from Morocco. There were a number of different kinds of plucked stringed instruments, many of them with a skin-covered body, that are found all over West Africa, and they go all the way down to Muslim West Africa. You find them in Nigeria, northern Nigeria, all over Mali and Guinea and Senegal. They're very often played by minstrels, by storytellers, by praise singers. And this tradition of praise singing then comes into Spain. We have old examples of skin-covered instruments, but they did not seem to survive. We find that there's an old instrument called the lute, which was a pear-shaped body with a wooden face, that is clearly related to the Arabic oud, which means wood. And the oud itself was originally a Persian instrument, as best we can tell. It seems to have originated in Persia, and was called a barbat. But from there developed a number of different instruments. The lute, the oud, came to the west with the Arabs, was introduced into Spain, and eventually became the Renaissance lute in France and the lute in Germany and in England. But it also traveled the other way, and from Persia went to India and to China, where it was called the pipa, and the pipa in Korea, and eventually even went to Japan, where it's still played in a number of different traditions, and it's called biwa, the Japanese word that is an adaptation of the old word pipa. But to get back to the guitar probably developed in some way out of the old Arabic oud, and we think of it now in terms of the form of the oud as we see it now played in the Arabic countries and in Turkey, and nowadays it's gone back to Iran even. But it evolved over many different forms. Sometimes it had a longer neck and a smaller body, and we find images of it, for example, in 12th century Spain, in the illustrations that accompany the cantigas, the Santa Maria of Alfonso the Wise. You see an Arab musician and a Christian musician playing together the same instrument. And it's related to the oud, a wooden face body, but a longer neck. The important thing to keep in mind is that there were many, many different varieties of stringed instruments played all over that region. Eventually, the one that we know as that was originally the oud became laud in Spanish, al-oud in Arabic, meaning the wood. In Spanish, they called it laud, the oud, or the wood. And then that became lauto or lauta. And that's the form in which eventually it became the lute. But the instrument itself went through many different variations. And eventually, another word came in, a Latin word, fidula. And fidula means fiddle, from where we get our modern word fiddle. But fidula is an old Latin word for a stringed instrument. And fidula became, in everyday Spanish, the word vihuela. which is the name by which the guitar was commonly known. What happened was that in the court, they began to use the word vihuela to refer to this development of the oud into now a smaller, slightly wasted body, smaller with a thick fingerboard so that you could play simultaneous notes at once. And this became the standard kind of guitar. It was used in the old court music, and it was used also amongst the populace. It plays a very important role in old Spanish music. Now, there's another development that's going on all during this time insofar as it affects the guitar, and that is most of the early guitars, including the vihuela, and similar to the oud of the Arabic countries, they're mostly double courses. That is, if you have a 6-string instrument, it would actually be strung with 12 strings, and each pair would be tuned to the same note. So it functions like it has 6 strings, but it in fact has 12, or 8 strings functioning like 4. The purpose of that is to give it a kind of echo. It sort of amplifies the sound. If you know the sound of a 12-string guitar compared to a regular guitar, it has a kind of a additional echo, amplified tone. It's more resonant. It's also just slightly out of tune because it's almost impossible to get 2 strings perfectly in tune and stay in tune together. So it's part of what gives the double course instruments their character. They came in many sizes. Vihuelas came in many sizes, at large and small. Very commonly, they would refer to the smallest one, a vihuela de mano, the vihuela played by hand, or of the hand, because it fit in the hand, a smaller instrument. They also used 2 playing techniques, which were very important, that distinguished the early playing of both the guitar and the vihuela, and that is 2 techniques called, one, rasgueo, or to strum, and punteo, meaning to point or to pluck. So they would sometimes pluck a melody and then sometimes strum across all the strings with the whole hand. And of course the strumming techniques are countless. And one of the very interesting side stories in all of this is that if you look at, for example, compare the vihuela or later the guitar, for example, in flamenco, or the smaller bandurrias, or the cavaquinhos from Portugal, each one, depending on its size, has a different strumming technique, a different way of getting the maximum sound out of the instrument. I mean, it's very interesting, for example, the Hawaiian ukulele is originally a Portuguese instrument. It's really a cavaquinho. And if you look at the way the Hawaiians play the ukulele, the strumming technique is very much still like the Portuguese, and the Brazilians, the way they play the cavaquinho. So we have an evolution of this vihuela-like instrument, a small, slightly wasted body with double strings. That was the original vihuela, and we find that in the 15th century, going all the way through the ages. It develops 15th, 16th, 17th century, and we don't find the guitar as we think of it now, the six-string guitar, until the 19th century, early 19th century, which is amazingly late if you consider the whole history that the string instruments have evolved over in Spain and Portugal. So whenever you find, for example, in Latin America, in Mexico, in South America, the use of a six-string guitar, you know that is a tradition that has probably come long after the others. The older traditions, for example, that you find in the coastal regions of Mexico and all over the Caribbean, Cuba, Puerto Rico, of double course guitars, double course lutes, those are older. Also in Venezuela and Colombia. We'll talk about those individually, but let's consider from the sort of historical point of view how the old traditions survive. Now, the old style of punteo, rasgueo, the old form of Spanish Arabic influenced music is now hard to find even in Spain because of the tremendous influence of, well, of course, modern music certainly, but from the 14th century on, when the gypsies, the Rome, began to enter Spain, they took up the local music of the Andalusian people, that is the people living in southern Spain, and developed something new out of it. And of course, that's probably, flamenco as we know it today, is probably only about 150 or 200 years old. The idea of combining the cante hondo, the old gypsy singing, with the guitar is not that old, but it now has thoroughly imprinted itself on the character of Spanish music, and so that we think of that as the characteristic old Arabic influenced Spanish music. So the old Andalusian music survives in a number of places. For example, there's a wonderful tradition of playing tangos y cuples in the city of Cadiz. They're double course guitars, and they play this old kind of very European sounding music, but it also is the result of Arabic influence.
Cosita y caracola, la luz primera, yo la vida, la gitanilla quiso mi ser, Santa Segura que me echó el agua al bautizarme, a la heteronía, que me confirmó también. Cuando salgo por la noche a pescar la fría, yo voy gritando, hasta los peces me cantan por alegría o por fandango. Y cuando el faro con gozo de noche al barrio se la alumbra, parece rica peineta que ciñe flamenca con que calamar. Yo le dice la sola, viva la viña barrionca.
In the flamenco tradition, while there's a number of the more recent Rom gypsy Spanish influenced styles, there's a few older ones. I like in particular, there's an old form of the fandango de cerro, mountain fandango, that still shows the use of rasgueo and punteo. It's a good example of how they used to play.
Yo me voy a la Alameda y allí me pongo a cantar. Los ojitos de tu cara no se pueden aguantar, no se pueden aguantar de lo bonito que son. Yo me voy a la Alameda, niña de mi corazón. Rociero y Casaón, señores, yo soy del cerro. Rociero y Casaón, con mi escopeta y mi perro, yo me encuentro superior. Señores, yo soy del cerro, yo me voy a la Alameda y allí me pongo a cantar. Los ojitos de tu cara no se pueden aguantar, no se pueden aguantar de lo bonito que son. Yo me voy a la Alameda, niña de mi corazón.
The large number of double course guitars, of course, is still found in the New World. Puerto Rico, for example, has 3 traditional instruments: the cuatro, which means 4, it's actually 8 or so double courses; the tiple, which means the high voice, or 3 strings, and another one called the bordonua. And those 3 instruments at one time used to play together. The tiple and the bordonua have largely fallen out of popular favor, but wow, the cuatro is still very much alive. I was there in 2008, yes, and there were cuatro factories all over Puerto Rico, and there were contests, and there were young people playing it. So, in addition to the more popular Afro-Puerto Rican music of the coast, there were lots of people playing the old traditional mountain music of the cuatros that was more connected to the old Andalusian music of Spain. Should also mention that a stopping off point along the way for many of the immigrants to the New World was for the Portuguese, the Azores Islands, but for the Spanish, the Canary Islands. And there we still find in the Canary Islands people playing double course guitars, wandering through the streets, serenading people, for example, on Christmas Day, one of these things, and that survives very strongly.
No, tírame un tiro y llévame al hospital y llévame al hospital y dile al hospitalero que me acaben de matar. Al hospitalero que me acaben de matar. Tirano, tírame un tiro y llévame al hospital.
So then in Puerto Rico, there are a number of ways of playing the cuatro, but we'll talk about a few of those. They tend to play, one of the strong aspects of the repertoire is a form called the aguinaldo, which is a Christmas carol. And what they did is take old Spanish Christmas carols and then adapt them locally and then start to play them as a basis for improvising couplets. But we'll talk about the couplets later. So let's look at a couple of examples of Puerto Rican music.
Muchas gracias y bueno.
Now then, in Cuba, there is one double course guitar that's very important. It's called a tres. That means three, and it actually is 6 strings, and it's a 6-string guitar used to play melody. So it functions like 3 strings but double course. Very often plays in the salsa ensembles, and it takes an improvised line, so it has an interesting role there. This is a modern example of salsa. Well, I say modern, it's the famous Arsenio Rodriguez from many years ago now, but it's a good example of the playing of the tiple. In South America, South America, there is one important instrument played in the northern part there, in both Venezuela and Colombia. It's called the bandola. It's also a double course instrument. The name bandola implies mandolin, bandoline, something like that. So it's a double course instrument. And it very often plays just like the harps do in the plains region of Venezuela and Colombia. A very vigorous, rhythmic kind of style of playing. But the use of double course guitar-like lutes is very old, and one of the oldest ones we can find is amongst the indigenous peoples of Mexico, because the Spanish priests first came to Mexico and established schools, and they taught the harp and the guitar to the indigenous peoples, and that survived. It became part of their folklore, part of their religious ritual music. And there are a number of peoples, for example, in the states in the region of the Huasteca and Veracruz and other parts, and also in parts of Yucatan and certainly in Chiapas. So here's an example of the Chamula people from Chiapas playing this 17-string double course guitar, and it's metal strings tuned very carefully, but it's got wooden pegs. They seem to be constantly tuning and retuning the guitar, but it plays mostly rasgueo, strumming whole chords, and it plays along with the harp and sometimes the violin. One last example of a double course guitar that we'll talk about is the charango, found in the Andean region of South America. There are many, many, but we're just talking about some of the high points. And the charango is made of a shell of an armadillo, and it has 5 double course strings, and it strums melody, but it does a tremolo that is rapidly striking the strings up and down so that it produces a tremolo version of the melody. So here's an example of the charango. The single course guitar, as I said, comes in last. It's one of the last developments. The first examples we have are probably early 19th century. I know we think of the guitar as very, very old and very Spanish, but as an instrument with just 6 strings, a basic guitar form, it's pretty late. So where we find it in the New World is a number of interesting places. One of them is Venezuela. There's an instrument called the cuatro, and in this case it actually does only have 4 strings. It usually only is used to accompany the harp, as strumming the harmony, but sometimes it plays both melody and harmony. Here's an example of playing both, wonderful example of both punteo, plucking, and rasgueo, strumming, played on the Venezuelan cuatro. In the coastal region of the state of Veracruz in Mexico, there are a number of guitar-like instruments, jaranas, requintos. They all have various names. They're all single course instruments, and they're used sometimes to pluck harmony and sometimes to play melody, to play punteo. The requinto is a particularly strong instrument that plucks the melody, and it has a little horn plectrum to make it even more percussive, while the jaranas accompany and do basically just harmonic patterns, but they play together. Yucatan, in the southeastern part of Mexico, there's a special tradition that's probably not much more than 150 years old, but it develops out of probably earlier Spanish influences there. They play trios of guitars, some playing punteo, some playing rasgueo in combination, and they play song forms that are very beautiful, sort of characteristic Latin American melodic and harmonic guitar combinations and lovely romantic songs. These are called jaranas and bambucos. They're characteristic of this region of.
Cantan los mirlos de mil colores, su alegre canto al rayar el día. Cantan alegre los ruiseñores, cantan alegre los ruiseñores y se despierta la amada mía. Cantan los mirlos de mil colores, su alegre canto al rayar el día. Cantan alegre los ruiseñores, cantan alegre los ruiseñores y se despierta la amada mía.
In Argentina, in South America, the guitar, the six-string guitar, was the basic instrument of both the gauchos and the country people. So it was used very much. But again, it must have been introduced or replaced an earlier instrument of double courses. So anyhow, now the guitar is very prevalent in that region of South America, and it's sometimes used. The gauchos played romantic songs and accompanied them. They told stories. They played dance music. Just the guitar provided all the dance music. Here's an example of a tradition that comes from the old gauchos of South America in Argentina. to summarize about the use of guitars in the New World, we talked about a number of different kinds of long neck lutes, but let's divide them into two as we did here. Double course lutes, we talked about the cuatro from Puerto Rico, the tres from Cuba, and the bandola from Venezuela, and the charango from the Andean region. Then of the single course guitars, we talked about the cuatro from Venezuela with only 4 strings, the Veracruz requinto, and then the guitar as we heard it in Mexico and in Argentina.